Hi everyone. I'm sorry I'm very late to posting this. I've had a lot of stuff going on, so I apologize that I'm late. But I did want to do my discussion. So I chose to do the discussion from James Beard's book, Sacred Scripture, Sacred War. And the chapter I chose was The Liberty Wherewith Christ Has Made Us Free. What I found during my research on this was that the most cited text during the Revolutionary period came from 1 Peter 2 and Romans 13, which talks about absolute allegiance to your sovereign leaders. And essentially, this was a controversy that ministers during this time period used the same scriptures but preached different sermons in order to override what the other side was telling their parishioners. So loyalists, they would say that Peter and Paul commanded um, I apologize. Sorry, my notes are written and I don't have good handwriting. Um, okay, loyalists. They said Peter and Paul condemned rebellion, and patriots would argue that obedience was meant only to just rulers. Um, so loyalists, they also would refer to Galatians 5:1, which gave basically Paul his freedom, um, and Paul used this to for political and spiritual freedom. John Wesley was a loyalist who was a Methodist, and he wrote a calm address to our American colonies. And Britain loved this so much that they actually published like 100,000 copies of it. Um, he called the rebellion, the American Revolution rebellion, a conspiracy, and he begged and urged the colonies to obey Peter and Paul um, by saying, quote, "Fear God and honor thy king," end quote. John Fletcher was also another Methodist loyalist, um, and he defended the British, and he wrote The Bible and the Sword. And essentially, he said, "Hey, the king has been trusted with the sword, so therefore we have to listen to him, right?" And he also said that Romans 13:4 was a warning um, from Paul against rebellion. Charles English, he actually went to the front lines of the Patriots, and uh, he looked at all of Peter and Paul's commandments, and he took the historical context and he applied it to what was going on in the American Revolution, and he preached on the front lines. Now, Jonathan Mayhew, he was a patriot minister who um, basically justified long before the revolution started. He had a sermon that said, like basically that you know, kids are supposed to obey their parents, but if their parents are telling them to do things that are criminal or do things that are not moral, that the children shouldn't do that, that they should do the things that they know are right. And so he said this applied also to leaders and to the king, saying that if a king is unjust or a ruler is unjust, then the people have a right to not obey what they're saying. And so this, again, was a long before the revolution, about 30 years before, right? So when the Patriots ministers, this sermon was very memorable. And so whenever the Loyalist ministers were using this, when the Loyalist ministers were using the context of Peter and Paul, the Patriot ministers in turn took this sermon from Mayhew and started using it to counter those effects. So, really good chapter, really interesting read.